Today's Neville Goddard conversation is on what we think from, we become, and reflected upon the video that we released on Thursday, which discussed an element from the Master Key system, intuition. And we spoke of the importance of intuition and how we are guided into the realization of our vision from within. One of the things that we want to recognize on the journey is that the thinking or the inner dialogue or the inner interpretations is facilitated from the end. So what I mean by that is when a person is, we could say, focused, or their attention is on the end, which means they're relating more so each day to whatever shows up on the journey to the end via the inner conversations or the inner interpretations and perspective, what ends up happening is we become more of that self-image that's one with that vision. Thus, we become what we think from, which is the state of mind that's one with the vision. And when I thought about this with a client today in a conversation, I was reminded of a story of one of my inspirational entrepreneurs that I had connected with on the journey prior to actually starting my venture in 2009. It was 2005, 2006, around that time, where there was a new restaurant that opened up, and it was a Jamaican restaurant run by a woman who decided that she was going to share her food with everybody because she received a lot of compliments on her cooking. So she opened up a restaurant with her husband. And one of the things that I realized was how fast her business would grow. And as I had mentioned many times, I like to study entrepreneurs and look at how they think and relate how they think to where they are right now, which further sheds light on what we have been discussing. Now, one of the things that was very apparent in the conversations that her and I used to have every time I would show up and buy some food is just how passionate and excited she was about what she made that day. It was like going over to your grandmother's kitchen, and she would say, "Oh, I made this today, and I made that today, and today's special is this because, there was a fresh supply of this and that and whatever ingredients." And she got you really excited about what it is that she was offering you, on the menu that day. And it really felt that in that moment, she was connecting you to her vision. And it connected me with my vision as well, because I realized that it was important for me to study entrepreneurs. Now, around that time, there was a number of restaurants opening up. And I noticed that her restaurant seemed to be accelerating as far as performance goes, sales go, business growth goes, because her and I had many conversations, more so than other restaurants. And what I found with these other restaurants is that they weren't necessarily thinking from the perspective of the fulfillment of the client and the value in their food or in the service. They weren't thinking from the ideal experience. But she was. And the facilitation of this inner conversation brought forth many interesting experiences. She would share with me the ideal location and creative ways of business growth. And she used to be there from morning till evening. And I believe she only took like maybe a week or so off a year in which her family would travel during that time. But other than that, she was there. She was always there. She loved to be there. She didn't really want to be anywhere else. From our conversations, she was so passionate about her food that she infused it in every dish that she made, and it tasted great. And there were lineups, and people would show up. People would enjoy it. And soon word got around about the quality of the food and the experience of the food that everyone I knew would go there for lunch or dinner, grab some takeout, and so forth. What I recognize upon reflection of the conversations I had with her, and now as we discuss further the importance of the internal dialogue in relation to vision, is that she was thinking from the vision and she became that person. She had a decision that she was going to do it, and she started it. And some way, somehow, she made it work, and she not only made it work in that particular location, she had to actually expand, and she ended up moving to another location so they can have a bigger kitchen and so forth. And one of the things that I really enjoy from the experience was those conversations with her. She had a way of articulating, not just in her food, but in her conversations, the love. That's why we spoke of in the last Neville Goddard conversation, the importance of seeing reality from a place of love. We call this thinking from the vision. Because when you think from the vision, you are in harmony and in contribution as far as everything you do, and you see everything in harmony and in contribution to your vision. Now, it's not to say that she didn't have challenging moments, but I remember during those times where she shared with me some of her challenges in business. She saw it more of like a puzzle. Like some way, somehow, we're going to do this thing to overcome this challenge. We got a shortage of this, and sometimes at certain times of day, we have a huge backlog of orders. But we're going to come up with some way, and here's this idea that I put in place, or her husband would tell me about some ideas. They seemed to find flow because they were thinking from the ideal of the vision. Now, Neville Goddard says, I rarely see a person alone without wondering, to what conversation piece is he tied? On what mysterious track is he walking? We must begin to take life consciously, for the solution of all problems lies just in this. The second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us, is trying to become self-conscious in the body, that he may be about his Father's business. What are his labors? To imitate his Father, to become master of the word, master of his inner talking, that he may mold this world of ours into the likeness with the kingdom of love. So through the creative entrepreneurial expression, she was molding reality, her world, including my world, and certainly all our worlds right now as we reflect upon these inspirations, into the kingdom of love. How so? Well, he goes on to state, and the prophet said, be ye imitators of God as dear children. Now, how would I imitate God? Well, we are told that God calls things that are not seen as though they were seen, and the unseen becomes seen. So this is speaking from inner dialogue, from inner interpretation, from the perspective of love in relation to the vision. She had a vision. She had a goal. And she wasn't the only one that I had conversations with in my earlier stages of the journey until this day, because I love connecting with entrepreneurs who also had a similar thread of inner dialogue in relation to whatever shows up on the journey. Maybe they had challenges. Maybe they had obstacles. But through that loving, flow-based inner conversation and inner dialogue, they were able to transmute the obstacle into an opportunity. Because they would carry on their inner dialogues and their inner interpretation and their inner imagining from the perspective of the end, the vision. And it was infused with love, in loving expression through their creative expression, loving inner dialogue, loving relationships with her clients, with her team members. And I've never observed her interacting with her vendors, but I believe that it's safe to assume, because I know how she is, she's authentic from that perspective, that she was actually also that way with everyone else, which further stimulated upon reflection of how everybody related with her. And she was very popular with whoever connected with her. And upon reflection of observing that love, which was within herself, reflected in people enjoying the food and enjoying those experiences as they would enjoy takeout or eat at the restaurant, it further stimulated and further encouraged that vision, thus allowing her to maintain that ideal state of mind that we refer to that is reflective of the vision. So this is thinking from the vision, inner dialogues from the vision, inner conversation from the vision, from the perspective of love in relation to people, environment, circumstance, and information, so that what externalizes and is reflected on is a result of what we are identifying within ourselves, which is love from the vision. Now, what this does is something very powerful. This creates an inner conviction, an inner assurance, because a person then looks at reality and says, this is a sign, this is a synchronicity, this is something. Look at all these comments that I'm getting from the people that buy my food, from the people that show up to the restaurants, about the quality of my food, about the quality of my experience. And I reflect upon these conversations and my experiences that I've had in her restaurant many times on my journey, because I realized that if I saw the parallels between those that succeeded with their restaurants and those that seem to have challenges, and if I understand the parallels and I could integrate those attributes of what she did from an inner mindset perspective, marketing, and all the other things that she was very proficient in as a result of thinking from the ideal, if I could replicate those things in some shape or form, not only from what I learned from her, but from other mentors, then I too would be able to ascend accordingly. And so those mentors laid the foundation during my earlier stages of business, growth, which then brought forth the replication or the exact replica of those experiences, because those impressions of how I saw business run and the results from became impressed on my subconscious mind and then brought forth through my own creative expression through the IT business, and continues on the journey. So this is what I encourage. As I had mentioned in the last video, one of the things I suggest is actually going into conversations or environments where you are exposed to these kinds of experiences, these kinds of entrepreneurs, these kinds of businesses. So you could actually study and see the cause and effect relationship, the effect of reality and the cause of thinking within, and see these parallels. Because once you see the connections, you get the conviction, you get the assurance, you understand how it works, and you begin to live like that yourself. We call this inspiration, as a result of reflecting upon the love that others represent, the love that others express through their own creative expression. He says, our attitudes unfold within us in the form of mental conversations. Inner talking from the premise of fulfilled desire is the way to consciously create circumstances. Now, this is very interesting. Inner talking from the premise of fulfilled desires is the way to consciously create circumstances. It was very apparent through the conversations that I had with her, through the experiences that I had in her business. The inner talking playing out in her conversations and how we felt, how her clients would feel, how you would feel when you ate at her restaurant. Now, one of the things that we talk about in the business world is the importance of how you make your clients feel, and how, generally, we tend to do business with those that we like and trust. Now, like and trust is a very deep attribute. And there's a lot of components that facilitate like and trust. One of the deepest and most powerful components to facilitate like and trust is love and authentic expression from that love. That attitude unfolds within us in the form of mental conversations, which is then expressed through verbal conversations or creative expression through whatever entrepreneurial endeavor infused in the business, in all aspects from the business. That is the inner talking, inner dialogue, from the perspective of love in relation to the vision, from the premise of the fulfilled desire, as in the inner conviction that others we're going to enjoy this food, that the business is going to grow, that success is inevitable when a person lives from the perspective of love in relation to the ideal self-image, which is one with the vision. So he says, our inner conversations are perpetually outpictured all around us in happenings. One of the things that I love about Neville is his ability to articulate the same thing from many different perspectives to stimulate the subconscious mind into realization. So let's read that again. Our inner conversations are perpetually outpictured all around us in happenings. Therefore, he says, what we desire to see and hear without, we must see and hear within. For the whole manifested world goes to show us what use we have made of the word. So reality outpictured from the inner conversations, from the perspective of the ideal outcome, the vision, the end. Thinking from the end, living from the end via inner conversations, which is expressed as outer conversations, outer behaviors, and outer interactions, and infused in our creative expression on the entrepreneurial journey to produce the success. So let's go a little deeper into this. He says, for ends run true to origins. If you would reap success, you must plant success. The idea in your mind, which starts the whole process going, is the idea which you accept as truth. So let's look at this for a moment. The idea in your mind, which starts the whole process going, is the idea which you accept as truth. So the reality of how we relate to is actually from the relationship within. Thus, it is an outpicturing of what we hold as truth. And that's why I recommend watching the last video where we talked about intuition. And we want to look at it from the perspective that intuition is guiding us to the truth on how to relate to whatever it is that shows up from a place of flow, harmony, love in relation to our vision and in relation to whatever or whoever or however we deal with whatever it is that shows up on the journey from the perspective of love. And we want to maintain this more so every day. Certainly, as I suggest that I saw these experiences with her, I also saw experiences where she was challenged, where I was challenged, where others have been challenged on the journey. And it's completely normal because we look at challenges as a source of opportunity. As a matter of fact, the textbook definition from what we learned from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow is actually found when challenge meets skill. So rather than running away from challenge, we embrace the challenge. One of the reasons why an individual would take a pathway like entrepreneurship is because they are stimulated by that challenge. There's a part of them that says, some way, somehow, I'm going to bring forth this vision and I'm going to learn and grow on the journey. I'm going to go through a process of self-realization. I'm going to go through a process of self-actualization. I'm going to actualize even more of my potentiality through this creative expression of entrepreneurship. And one of the things I love about entrepreneurship is the fusion between arts and sciences. There was a process that she went through to make the food. And it was infused with the artistic love and thus combined together created the experience in which others enjoy. I'm really glad that my client and I had this conversation today because these realizations of what I had experienced during the journey from these teachers, they were mentors to me, further unravel themselves as I continue on this journey. As I go back into my imagination and relive those experiences that I had with them, I feel like they're happening right now. And I get to look at it from my current vision. And as a result of looking at it from the perspective of my current vision, I'm able to relate back to those past experiences from the perspective, thinking from the perspective of my current vision. And then I'm able to get even more understandings. And so he says, the mind always behaves according to the assumption with which it starts. Therefore, to experience success, we must assume that we are successful. And assuming that we are successful means living now from the perspective of the ideal, through the inner interpretations. If a person is experiencing some challenge right now in which they interpret it from the perspective of, this doesn't seem like it'll bring forth my vision, or this is too challenging and I'm frustrated, that those are identifications. A person might become reactive to those inner interpretations, but they still have the ability to release from that reactivity. Which is why, again, I recommend watching that video that I released on Thursday, because I suggested in there a number of things that I do to maintain the ideal state of mind, the flow way of being, so that I could catch myself as a result of honoring those intuitive ways of doing things. And I even brought up an example from Elon Musk of the very nonlinear and unconventional things, or so it may appear to others, that he does, which I believe stimulate his creativity, which bring forth his innovation. And these different ways of doing things are very powerful, because what it's doing is it is allowing us to return back to the childlike state of curiosity. And with the childlike state of curiosity, when we look at whatever shows up as a challenge, like a child, we're able to somehow automatically realize that some way, somehow, we're going to ascend past it. And all the child has to do is maintain that. And they do. They figure it out. They find some way to ascend past it. And this is something that we also experience in the journey. And my aim to this conversation is to further encourage it. So he says, the mind always behaves according to the assumption with which it starts. That means right now. See yourself as already that person at the end now. And recognize how the relationships, the resources, everything that you have within awareness right now is going to play a role, as he refers to as the bridge of incidents, to lead you to that end, some way, somehow, by carrying on the inner conversation from the perspective of love, thinking from the ideal vision. He says we must live wholly on the level of imagination itself, and it must be consciously and deliberately undertaken. It does not matter if, at the present moment, external facts deny the truth of your assumption. If you persist in your assumption, it will become a fact. The truth is, and speaking about the truth, love is persistence in the assumption. What you love, you eventually behold. You end up experiencing that which you truly love. And you're able to stay committed to what you love. And when she started out this journey, when others start out the journey, and I reflect back my own experience, and I want to share with you how I had infused these understandings that I learned from her into the things that I do. They started from the journey of seeing the end, the vision. And love carried them. And the inner dialogue from the perspective of love carried them all throughout the journey. Perhaps they had challenges, maybe a lot of challenges. But some way, somehow, the love stimulated imagination and inner dialogue and inner interpretation and perspectives that was allowing them to look at whatever it is that showed up and transmute it over to an opportunity if it was once perceived as an obstacle, as a result of maintaining the inner dialogue from the perspective of love. These kinds of experiences that I've seen with others, a lot of times with restaurateurs, I recognize were important in how I and my team, when I had my IT business, would carry out our service to the clients. So I made sure that I brought on contractors that absolutely loved the technology. I remember one of my contractors, He was an extreme aficionado for Windows, the operating system. And he did his certifications, and he loved it. And every time he spoke about the technologies surrounding Windows, he would get all excited about it, and to the point where he would look at any other technologies and say, it's not as good and whatever. And whether he was right or wrong, that was outside the point, because the reality was he loved the technology. And when I had opportunities for him to go in and put in some of the networking technologies, he would go in and he would put in the hours, and he would love what he would do, and then he would stay with the clients and he would help them troubleshoot. And it was done from a place of love, and the clients would come back to me and they would say, "Thank you for bringing Daniel into the site." And maybe Daniel's watching the video. He was great. He was excellent. He was so helpful. And we know now the reason why, upon reflection of Neville Goddard's information, is he was carrying on the inner conversation in relation to the experiences from the perspective of authentic love. For me personally, I was a big fan of wireless networks and the Cisco routing and switching. So that was my thing that I would get very excited about. And those are the things that I would do, or certain kinds of projects and tasks that I really love to do for the clients. I would do that. And I would find contractors who really love to work with different technologies, and they would just go at it. As a matter of fact, his brother, and we've known each other since grade school, when I had a challenge with Java, and he was very proficient at Java, programming with Java, I took my laptop over to his house with this point-of-sale system that I was working on at the time, which we were customizing some open-source software. And he loved programming, and he loved programming with Java. And we sat there, and he was having so much fun trying to debug something that was going on with the software. And he was having a great time, and some way, somehow, as he worked his magic on it, he figured it out. So thus it's important then to recognize that when we see reality from the perspective of love, we are going to stay committed till the solution is found, till it's brought forth. So living from the perspective of love, and doing the things that we love, and staying committed and having those inner conversations in relation to whatever shows up from the perspective of love, allows us to do what he says here. Be ye imitators of God as dear children. How would I imitate God? Well, we are told that God calls things that are not seen as they were seen, and the unseen becomes seen. Because it is from the perspective of love that we can see beyond what the five sensory experience is presenting. We've been speaking about this, seeing beyond what the senses perceive. So let's go ahead and further integrate this and conclude today's discussion with an affirmation. We can say, I realize that more so on the journey to realizing my vision, I'm able to think from and thus become a representation of love. As a result, I mold this world into the likeness with the kingdom of love. From this perspective, I carry on inner dialogues and inner interpretations automatically from the premise of the vision realized. Through this process, I further embody the experience and see my tasks, my project, to bring forth my success from a perspective of flow all the way to completion, while further carrying on the thoughts, imaginal activities, and inner conversations from the perspective of love. I recognize that these inner conversations are outpictured in the happenings on the journey to realizing my vision. As a result, I further honor the inner conversations of love that are guided from within via intuition. Upon recognition, I realize that I am successful now, and this experience is leading me down the pathway from the perspective of flow and love to realizing my vision. And thus I'm able to easily persist in my assumption till it becomes fact. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.